I went in the Virgin Megastore in London. That's when I came across Encyclopaedia Psychedelica. The magazine itself was a kind of compendium of poetry and alternative thinking and sort of rant. And it was kind of a modern-day version of Oz magazine, the countercultural magazine of the 60s. I suddenly had this urge to write about music.
This is Season 2 of The Corruption Diaries, a podcast from the Tax Justice Network. I'm Naomi Fowler, and this series is all about veteran tax campaigner Richard Allen. By the mid-80s, the free festival scene had slowly dwindled, but Richard had started to find new ways to connect with people through the music he loved. His first big step was in 1986 when he got in touch with a beacon of the underground music scene, Fraser Clark, the founder of Encyclopaedia Psychedelica.
Went in the Virgin Megastore and came across a copy of it, and I wrote to them and said, would you be interested in a music column? And Fraser, who ran it, I met him, Scottish guy. He was on a mission to create this more updated counterculture. I got on with him really well. I found him really very charismatic. I got a little music column in there, writing about some of the bands I was into, and the magazine had been sent some records, and I reviewed those records in the magazine and other things I picked up myself. A friend of mine called Ken Ingham, he said, I've got this great magazine, you should have a look. And he gave it to me, a copy of Freakbeat magazine, I think it was number 1. And I looked at it and thought, oh, it's really good.
Freakbeat was a fanzine set up in the mid-80s by Ivor Truman and Hugh Deller, who were into the neo-psychedelic and garage revival of the time.
And the magazine itself was very complicated. It was multicoloured, printed in 3D. You had a pair of 3D glasses to read it, but it was difficult to read if your eyesight was bad or you were colourblind. It was writing about the kind of music that I was then getting into, which was collectors' 60s, 70s kind of garage bands mainly. The rave scene started in the late 80s. Fraser became obsessed with it, wasn't interested in rock music. He started running a club in London called the Megatripolis, which became a big sort of rave thing. Fraser went down that road. I kind of lost interest in it, and I concentrated on Freakbeat magazine. When I wrote to the magazine, Freakbeat, I offered to submit some reviews, and the editor, Ivor, wrote back to me and said that the other editor, Hugh, had to discontinue with him, and would I like to be the editor? So I ended up being editor of a magazine. Ivor was an expert on Pink Floyd. He wrote a fanzine.
His fanzine was about Pink Floyd band member Syd Barrett, and it was called The Amazing Pudding.
Very knowledgeable about music, much more into the punk kind of side of things than me. Liked more kind of discordant type rock, the Cramps, that kind of thing. I was always more into the kind of like prog rock side of things. So between the two of us, our tastes crossed over. He was able to do things with computers and artwork. Because he'd run a fanzine, he knew how to do all the artwork and layout and things like that. Yes, 87 was the year where that was issue 4, was the one that I sort of got involved in it heavily. That was the start. So I guess at that point I saw myself as a journalist, underground music journalist. I started to get to know labels and bands, and I got in contact with Greg Shaw in the States, who was a very famous journalist. He wrote pretty much the first rock fanzine back in San Francisco in the 60s and worked for a major record label and had his own label called Bomp. And through Greg, I got connected with people all over the world, and I just sort of started to become a music journalist in my spare time. I started to critically reread what I was writing over the years and think I need to make this a bit more professional and not look like it's, written by a sort of excited teenager. There's so many bands I was listening to. Long Ryders, the Fuzz Tones, Rain Parade, Green on Red, the Dream Syndicate. Plastic Land was a band that I always loved. I'm not looking specifically for a particular style. It just so happens that an artist produces a piece of music that immediately grabs my attention and is constantly surprising me as it progresses So it has its own unique flavour. I think I did maybe 10 reviews in each issue. I was then interviewing bands and started to interview people and write about them. And we covered, for example, the Flaming Lips. I've interviewed the Flaming Lips before anybody knew who they were, a long time before they became the huge band that they became. I started to get involved, I guess, in the music industry in a way in which a lot of people went into it initially, which was really as just a sort of a fan who then starts to get involved in actually promoting music. By writing about it, you're promoting it, and the next thing you know, bands see you as important, they start sending you tapes, and then the next thing you start thinking is, well, why don't we release this? You get a tape and you think, this is so good, this needs to come out, let's put it out. It was Ivor's idea originally, was to put music in the magazine on flexi discs, which we did, and we started getting more and more bands wanting us to put their music in the magazine, and we had too much music, effectively, to put in the magazine. And that eventually became the label, because we did a compilation album of all the stuff we couldn't fit into the magazine. If you're writing about music, your record collection is your office, and everything is like a reference book. I've had a bed set, and he ran everything from there, and I would go over and we would meet up. I didn't move. I was still living with my parents until 1991. My bedroom was like an office. I started to sort of collect artists. I was in a very famous record shop just off Portobello Road called Plastic Passion. Famous American people and British rock stars would go into that shop and buy records, and it was kind of a real important place for new music. And I was in there one day, and I heard a record playing, and I thought, what is this? And the particular song that was playing was called A Play on Wordsworth, and the lyrics were like Wordsworth. I was absolutely blown away by it. It sounded like an American band, West Coast band from the 60s, late 60s, but at the same time it sounded like Irish folk rock. And it had this kind of strange mixture of the two, and I just fell in love with it. I wrote to the band, and they wrote back to me, and I interviewed them in Freakbeat, and we just got correspondence going. I got to know the Fallon brothers, John and David, and the guitarists Tim Gilman and Jim Bailey, the drummer. I absolutely loved that band. I just fell in love with their music, and eventually I started helping them out, and it turned into the gig. We put them on with a band called the Bevis Frond and a band called the Chemistry Set. In 1989, the magazine decided to put a concert on at the Greyhound in Fulham. It was called the Freakbeat Freakout. It sold out and absolutely rammed to the rafters. We weren't expecting that. You couldn't move in there. It was just insane. 500 people in the Greyhound. Julie, who's my partner, she helped me on the door. I remember there was so much cash that she was having to stuff it into her clothes because there was nowhere to put it. And I remember during the gig wandering around buying everyone drinks with the change. And I remember coming back, we were laughing, just counting this huge pile of cash. Not that cash was ever my motivation for going to the music industry, but it was a real buzz to suddenly have something that was financially successful. Everyone there had a great time. So I just suddenly thought, wow, I really enjoyed it, putting that gig on. And I kind of got the buzz for really gigs. And that was really my first voyage into the music industry. So it went from a hobby to a job that night, I guess. And we came away from it absolutely buzzing. And that was my first experience of a successful promotion of a band in a live environment. I just got the bug from that. I realised that it is possible to have a job doing that, which is, of course, at that time I was still working at Sanderson's. So I suddenly realised I want to get out of import and export and I want to work in the music industry. That became a goal. We did a second gig that totally bombed. It was on a World Cup final day. Never promote a concert on World Cup final day. Nobody will turn up no matter who you put on. So I learned early on, you can make a lot of money on one night and lose it all the next.
You've been listening to the third episode of The Corruption Diaries Season 2, hosted by me, Naomi Fowler, and produced and sound designed by Leo Schick. In the next episode.
And I remember listening to a track on my bicycle on the way to work after my friend had said, you need to listen to this tape, thinking I could hear this being played in a stadium. And of course, years later it was.
Delirium Records music was courtesy of Cherry Red. And She Rides, courtesy of the Long Ryders and Warner Music Publishing. See the show notes for the full track listing.